Welcome. Today's post is Science of Stars, Stardom and Star Wars. Published on September 26, 2022. Star Wars was the biggest movie of 1977, but did you know the second biggest film of the year came out the same week? Did you know that both films involve a group of rebels smuggling a girl dressed all in white, Carrie, long distances away from the government? Do you know what Carrie plus white meant in 1977? November 3, 1976, Carrie White. Stephen King. What does it mean to smuggle Carrie White out of the government hands in 1977? It's a deep rabbit hole, so let's get started. The prominence something has in culture is often equal to the scale of the coordinated effort that put it there. This is why the most historically popular things to exist in the world are often precisely related to the most important events that shaped history. If we look at the top movie, top music, top show, top news story, top anything with a comms perspective, we can learn what was most important to the people with the most power. We aren't necessarily talking about what the bulk of people wanted, it can even be the opposite of what the masses might prefer. Either way, the most popular things to ever exist are a coded tapestry, and with decoding we can unravel the true form of history. With that in mind, what is the most successful movie ever? Gone with the Wind. 1939. Gone with the Wind officially is that title. Why was this so popular? What does that even mean? Gone with the Wind? I'll give you a hint. Within a day of the publishing of the book, the Pope outlined a papal decree on motion pictures. Note he talks about needing to elevate it. This fits in line with how the movie would become the most popular thing ever to exist even till this day. Note he gives special emphasis on how important the talking picture is before talking about elevating it. If you don't understand from that, I'll have to get more blunt. The comms answer is easy if you learn the history. Clark Gable would become King of Hollywood through Gone with the Wind. A title he inherited from Douglas Fairbanks, who died the same week the movie was released. The fact that he died 3 days before it was released is not why the title changed hands. Why did he lose the title of King of Hollywood? Well, he was the king of silent movies. Douglas Elton Fairbanks had a career that died precisely when countless others did. In the 1930s, there was a transition from silent pictures to talkies, and Douglas Fairbanks was not a gifted speaker. Starting to understand the title yet? This answers everything about Gone with the Wind, especially why it was so popular. It represented the transition from silent films to those with audio. The book it was adapted did too. This is why the very first line describes the main character as not beautiful. But she could charm just the same. How? By talking. It's a major point of the book/movie, the dialogue between her and Clark Gable. The book was written to be adapted into film, to demonstrate what could be done with talking pictures. Wind equals speech. Gone with the Wind equals Douglas Fairbanks, and countless others. In fact, the very first part of the film is asserting Gone with the Wind means precisely that. The assertion that the old way of doing things is gone forever. This was not a line in the book. The main character Clark Gable. Gable? Gab? Gab plus able. Able to gab, able to speak. A transition embodied in the actor. A message sent that the silent age of films was over. That just having a pretty face was no longer enough. This film was promoted to punctuate the changing of an age. This is also likely why Fairbanks died the same week as the silent era was being said to be over. December 12, 1939, former King of Hollywood Douglas Elton Fairbanks' death. Plus 3 days. December 15, 1939. Gone with the Wind premiered 3-day festival. Likely he was a comms vehicle for powerful individuals. Most big celebrities are, and with banks in his name, whatever comms he sent was likely about funding. Like many who lived as a comms extension, he was given a fake death so as to further drive home the message that the entire prior industry of silent films were now gone with the wind. And it was. The most famous movie line by most measures is the final one of the film. Where shall I go? What shall I do? I suspect this was the symbol of multitudes of out of work due to being unable to speak. The apathy towards their plight is well documented by the film industry, and it represents that. I'd need read the book/watch the film to understand precisely the symbolism. I know the basic story of the fall of Scarlet is that she spends the whole book/movie in love with a Confederate soldier, the old way, rather than seeing the new world of Clark Gable. Keep in mind how expensive it was to convert silent movies to talkies. Likely there were many holdouts, and this was a strongly worded rejection to trying to hang on to the past. Just as Scarlet did, it was only after she lost everything that she realized she loved Gable, after all. It ends with her proclaiming she would go back to her family farm and show Gable that she did in fact love him from then on. I also know Scarlet has a father in the story with a thick Irish accent as a major plot point. Which is interesting because having a thick accent is what killed most careers of the time. I suspect if I did read the book I'd find some kind of subtext for motives of the time and excuses given for not converting silent theaters to audio. While I can't fully decode this without watching, I am confident of the primary com. In fact, we can look at the book release and see it too was timed for a major milestone in sound plus film history. The day before it was released, the Empire State Building to the Waldorf Astoria, most famous building in the world at the time, turned on a transmitter for the first time to broadcast audio plus visual television signals. June 29, 1936. Empire State Building begins broadcasts high-definition TV, 343 lines. June 30, 1936. Gone with the Wind published Margaret Mitchell. The day after the broadcast we get Gone with the Wind, as people could see the old era was done. In this sense, the symbol of an antiquated time being the one left. In prior posts I go into both of those buildings, Waldorf especially, as they tie into blackmail history. Which is why I find it interesting that August 12, 1942, Clark Gable joins U.S. Army. August 13, 1942, Army Corps Engineer Manhattan District builds set up a bomb. January 25, 1939, first nuclear fission experiment, splitting of a uranium atom, in the U.S. January 26, 1939, Gone with the Wind production/principal photography begin. Given Clark was King of Hollywood at the time, it's possible that another connection with his duties as a symbol of Hollywood was in cooperating with the war effort. Propaganda is crucial to keep morale up in a war, no matter the country. In case you are new here, nuclear is a com used for explosive information, like blackmail, as I go into in many posts. Read that post if you don't know what I'm talking about, because it's the most important post I've ever made. The answer of the secret to Gone with the Wind may be a little underwhelming, but that's only because you aren't from that world. This was a major transition in media, and media control is crucial for creating stars, like politicians, getting a country to go to war, and countless other things. The next movie to decode is another holder of most popular. In a way it's far more popular than Gone with the Wind. Adjusted, that film was only $3 billion, Star Wars was $2 billion, but if you count up the entire franchise. This is a long requested decode. So let's finally go through it. Star Wars intro. What is Star Wars about? Not the universe, but the first movie. The answer is the plot was about the smuggling government stolen classified information away from the controlling government into the hands of those conducting a rebellion against it. The opening text crawl focuses on this. Now if we assume this was an important comm, which it must have been, then whatever messaging they were sending revolved around moving secret files from one location to one outside of government reach. The focus of the first scene of the film is Carrie Fisher hiding what is described later as stolen data tapes from the government. All of this while the officer of the government in charge chokes a rebel to get them back. Just like with Gone with the Wind, context is crucial, and did you know the same week Star Wars made its debut, the second biggest film of the year did as well. Not only were they released same week, both films co-star Carrie, dressed in white. May 19, 1977, Smokey and the Bandit #2 movie of year. May 25, 1977, Star Wars #1 movie of year. Comms are tied to what is promoted and them being massively successful movies, number 1 and number 2 of the year, then might both movies be sending the same message? Both films involve a group of rebels smuggling a girl dressed all in white, Carrie, long distances away from the government. Smokey and the Bandit has that same plot thread and it was released the same week. Both iterations of the all-in-white, Carrie, are women written to be bossy and take control of the person who rescues them. In both cases taking the role of driver forcefully despite the protests of those around them. There are many more connections I'll be going into, but it's clear we first need to understand that Carrie connection. Why does it matter that both films bringing a Carrie in white away from the government? This is 1977. What is the symbol of Carrie plus white in 1977? Ever hear of Carrie White? A blockbuster success 6 months before Star Wars hit theaters. It was in theaters at the same time, or just before it. So the name was a crucial comm being invoked by both films. This was also Stephen King's first novel. Given how important he is as the 4th best-selling author of all time and by far most successful horror writer. The literal king of horror, the fact that he began with Carrie tells us it was likely an important comm. The fact that Carrie would then be invoked by the 2 biggest movies of the year, one of which the biggest media franchise to date tells us we are dealing with a very important comm. November 3, 1976, Carrie White. Stephen King. May 19, 1977, Smokey and the Bandit, steals Carrie in white from government. May 25, 1977, Star Wars, steals Carrie in white from government. Before we can understand the 2 1977 films we first must understand Carrie. It's at the core of everything here. Carrie. There are few movies that exist with a more obvious MK Ultra connotation than Carrie. The movie begins with Carrie being shamed and bullied relentlessly, she then gets humiliated in a famous scene where she begins having her period but doesn't know what a period is and thinks she is dying. As she screams terrified, all the girls throw tampons while laughing at her. MK kids are intentionally kept ignorant so that even basic things like a period would never be approached. This is possible because of the family. Specifically her abusive mother who would teach her everything incorrectly and lock her in a box periodically as punishment. The basics of the story are of a child being tortured all her life from all angles, and that is the way of MK Ultra. It begins in childhood because a child can be molded more easily than an adult. The goal with trauma is to create a dissociative state in the child. A state when the brain creates a mental barrier to shield you from immediate trauma. This makes people very suggestive and allows programming. Letting the abuser drive the victim. A complex affair which involves not one abuser but an entire community. Comms-aware people throughout a community who coordinate, and this is why Carrie White, who is abused all her life by family and friends, fits this model. This does not mean every abuser is comms-aware. Creating MK kids is complex and only a fraction of those involved in the abuse know what is really going on. Many of the people involved are themselves MK'd and abusive because they are conditioned themselves to be abusive. This is likely the case with her mother who acts insane. She and almost every child in the film dies, most of the school kids abuse out of pure conformity. They are themselves shepherded into the act by the coordinated efforts of the MK plan. Keep in mind she was already mentally scarred and a target for bullying, so having a force amplify until she completely breaks and accepts the role of a killer. There are many variants and a common ancestry in ops. Note in the trailer for Carrie it begins by talking about the Bates High School GYM. This is a reference to Norman Bates and the Bates Motel from Psycho. A film about a man with dissociative disorder with extreme issues with his abusive mother. The connections to Carrie and the mother are obvious as well as the murdering. Psycho scared people away from small hotels, and given the birthdate of the protagonist of Psycho was the same as a famous mass murder of Jews, I suspect the film was a warning. A message from certain CIA cells to Mossad, which both blackmail using hotels, based on past digs, that they could send psychopaths to hotels. Character's sister is killed and she is hunted by a psycho. A message perhaps of how they would fight them if necessary. Do you want us to do this? Psycho was based on Ed Gein, a killer famous for skinning women, making a woman suit so that he could become his mother. Psychological issues like that aren't natural, they are orchestrated. They are used in many ways. Some are kept always on edge so that at a moment's notice they can be activated as a school shooter or other tragedy. This is perhaps why the newest actress to play the role was born on the same day as a famous child murderer. The Kobe child murders I've went over in past posts as significant. Note the other names involved as well. Both being Mary/Marie, which, just like how Carrie wore a wedding dress, married, likely symbolized commitment. Commitment to create a monster. Note the name of the original Sissy Spacek, name of an child's insult plus space. Note the first page of the novel, which begins with August 1966. Enterprise, 1 month ahead of Star Trek debut in the Enterprise. A show which I've went over tied to the MK Ops, coordinating. Note the second episode, which involves a telekinetic boy on a rampage. This ties into the supernatural angle of Carrie, as she has telekinetic powers that flare up when she is distressed. Telekinetic, tele equals telephone. KIN equals lineage, ET equals Morse code, a symbol for family surveillance ongoing. The ones surveilling are both foreign and local, with those far away collecting tapes on everyone while the local ones try to find the best way to break a target in their most vulnerable moments. They are given suggestions to grow more and more disturbing with sexuality, and acts like keeping pornography or masturbation become a minefield for them, as people will find an excuse to barge in precisely when they know it would do the most damage. Piling up trauma year after year. The system is built in such a way that those that control the abuse are not the ones that get targeted for murder. Carrie has a good example of why this is. In the case of Carrie, this is represented by Sue Snell. Note how she was an abuser but then became Carrie's only friend. Symbol for a handler. Note how, despite being the good guy, she is the one that orchestrates the humiliation accidentally by setting her up for the prom where she gets pig's blood dumped on her. This is because the ones that coordinate the abuse intentionally place themselves out of the line of fire of it. I also note the birth date, as it looks to be a calm. September 10, 1953. Amy Irving born, Carrie debut September 10, 1953. Swanson TV dinner. Previous Thanksgiving they had tons of leftover turkey and turned it into dinners. The actress that played her being born the same day TV dinners were invented. Leftover turkey, leftovers as in extra family members being microwaved/nuked. Turkey equals an animal symbolic for sacrifice for a family. Famously getting its neck cut off every Thanksgiving. I can't think of another animal with that sacrifice symbolism. This ties into the brand name as well. Swan Son, swan equals symbol of ugly duckling turning into beautiful swan. Trading an extra family member for perks. Stardom. It being a TV dinner as it involves surveillance. Watching a target as though their lives was a show. Turkey itself is tied to presidential assassination. Check my Thanksgiving decode. So these TV dinners were likely a deal being laid out at the time. To monitor family members as they are tortured to become assets for a buyer. The success in the market represented the approval of the powers o' the time. 1953 is right there early on when the MK Ops were getting going. Note that developed the means for the control of the activities and mental capacities of individuals, whether willing or not. MK Ops were government, however they were shut down officially in the 60s, and as I go into in my post about the end of the MK Ops, I explain how JFK kept the MK files as they were shut down to use as leverage. If you were going to symbolize those many MK files, what name would you use for them? These are symbols about driving someone else to make bad decisions. What female name can you think of that most symbolizes a CR? Carrie. Now we can get back to Star Wars/Smokey and the Bandit, which both involved Carrie smuggling. And so what did it mean to smuggle Carrie away from the government in 1977? I go over 1977 frequently. 1977 is the year of the MK Ultra hearing, and within 24 hours of the massive changes to intelligence operations. The beginning of Q clearance. The moving of nuclear material. Nuclear material is what? Illegal tapes. Among other things, as I go over frequently, and this is why in 1977, the most popular two movies both involved smuggling Carrie away from the government. In Star Wars, Carrie Fisher is smuggled away from the government, and in Smokey and the Bandit a girl named Carrie is smuggled away from a forced marriage by a police officer across multiple state lines. To understand why the government decided to move the MK evidence, it requires understanding affiliation. From 1961–1976, there was one affiliation and then it switched in 1977. This is why the hero of Star Wars has a backstory built to Jimmy Carter, both small-time farmers with a similar narrative of him saving the world from the corruption of the Republicans with Watergate. This is why the intel community changed. I've gone over this connection in comms before, but it goes deeper. George Lucas had paired with The Godfather director Francis Ford Coppola before this for American Graffiti, which given Ford Coppola's connection to Jimmy Carter, as I went into last post, that he was sending comms in relation to his promotion. It lends to George Lucas at the time being a mouthpiece of the CIA at that time frame. The change in how nuclear materials were kept, which is crucial concept when we are talking about Star Wars. What are nuclear materials? Blackmail, among other things, and how is blackmail kept? Old data, and so now that the WH was secured, a plan was made to move operations overseas. In Star Wars this is computer files plus Carrie Fisher. In Smokey and the Bandit it's alcohol smuggling and Carrie Frog. Note the intro song, Jesse James, a famous murderer who despite well-known brutality was lionized as a hero. Movie begins with a Kirk, as in Star Trek, remember the Carrie origin with Enterprise, and an arrest for trying to move illegal booze. The symbol of the booze is tied to water equals info comms. Various other liquids symbolize types of information, and when you consider the symbolism of beer, what would it symbolize as info? Star Wars is also about smuggling alcohol. Who is Obi-Wan Kenobi? Alec Guinness. Ever heard of Guinness beer? But that's just the beginning. I've barely scratched the surface of the connections here. Note the director of Smokey and the Bandit, HAL, Space Odyssey, evil computer, need ham radio being the shorthand for people running comms. While Star Wars is starred by a Mark plus ham radio plus ILL, sick. Note on the right here, the fact that the villain of Smokey and the Bandit is a sheriff named Justice played by Jackie Gleason. Famously from the Honeymooners. One of the most famous shows ever to exist, ranked in the top 3 for all-time famous shows, and in the top 2 for most popular character of all time on TV Guide. Sheriff Justice, Moon, who had captured Carrie, and the Bandit who steals Carrie away from the moon. Note how in the intro to Honeymooners Jackie Gleason is shown as literally the moon. Specifically is tied to the moon. And taking things to the moon. Bam zoom, straight to the moon. The entire opening of the show involves him as the moon. What is the most famous line from Star Wars? There are many of them, but a big contender would be, "That's not a moon, but a space station." In both cases we are dealing with a symbol of the moon which has Carrie that they have to take and smuggle away. In Smokey and the Bandit the entire chase is to return Carrie to the moon. The man synonymous with honeymooners, that is. So let's go over this honeymooners symbol to clarify why. Honeymooners plus Pluto. The first episode of Honeymooners involves Jackie Gleason over-the-top angry abusive husband threatening violence. First episode and the first sketch that predated it involved different stories about getting a new television. Remember the TV dinner comms. This episode is ranked high in TV Guide for best episodes of all time, which implies the comms were important, and note the storyline. It involves his neighbor Ed Norton trying to watch a show called Captain Video. Specifically Captain Video going to Pluto and the moon. I've dug into Pluto symbolism in many posts and it is always tied to MK Ops. All the planets have a unique comm to them and that's Pluto. Know what else I've decoded as MK around that time frame? Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Why is that important? Because June 27, 1949, Captain Video Honeymooners first episode focus, Secret Files of Captain Video. June 27, 1949, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer gene. Just so happened to be recorded the same day Captain Video began. Many famous things have dates carved into them specifically because they were used to send a message. They likely had a catchy jingle waiting to be made into a famous song, they just wanted to time it perfectly, and that was the event they decided on. This allows them to direct people to the right comms in media attached to it. Note the screenshots on the right as well. The first episode of Captain Video involves spying on a CR crash and getting secret audio. The next iteration of Captain Video is literally called Secret Files of Captain Video. With this we understand the symbol of Carrie being taken from the moon. It ties into the 1977 nuclear waste data changes. Damaging footage was collected from data centers around the USA and then put in the hands of foreign powers. This is why Q highlights it moving to offshore. Let's go through them sequentially now. There are many more pieces worth discussing. Smokey and the Bandit. The film begins with a Kirk failing to move alcohol. This leads to the rich Biggs hiring the famous Bandit for the job. Note his decal on the truck, stagecoach robbery. Ties in with Jesse James as a symbol for someone evil but praised by the media. Biggs is accompanied by his dwarf son. Dwarf is a symbol tied to Mossad with common connotations of blackmail and surveillance, Mossad second only to CIA in intel agencies. Which means a dwarf hiring him to move beer symbolizes a likely cooperation with Israel, which fits the timeframe given 1977, was the year Decode first won in Israel. Note the date of it. May 17, 1977, Decode, Netanyahu, wins first victory over left wing in over 30 years. Plus 2 days later. May 19, 1977, Smokey and the Bandit, steal Carrie in white from government. May 25, 1977, Star Wars, Carrie/steal Carrie in white from government. Given their media control if they were to cooperate to send promotion of ops with the CIA. MOS plus CIA would be almost all media. Which means it makes sense for Star Wars to become as popular as it did if it had both sides of the media pool running promo for it. Both footing the bill. It's important to note that the basic structure of the CIA/Mossad. It's cell-based, and this is why the structure of the scattered rebels in relation to the big empire is a fitting analogy. Or in Smokey and the Bandit, the other truckers. Throughout the entire film, the Bandit is helped by hundreds of truckers who go to extraordinary lengths for no logical reason. Not one time but over and over throughout the film in all sorts of different ways. But we'll get there. So the Bandit is purchased and he goes to a man he got thrown into jail in the past to offer a job. There's a lot of little comms not worth going over here, but I'll leave the pics as you may recognize them from past decodes. Note the car with the Confederate flag purchased. Symbol of rebellion. They go over multiple ways of keeping their transmissions coded so as to avoid law enforcement and agree it'll be easy. They get to the beer as one of several personalized Smokey and the Bandit theme songs play. Driving a forklift. Fork symbolizing pitchfork. Note as soon as they get the alcohol he gets called Spider-Man, and this is precisely when Carrie appears trying to get away from her wedding to the sheriff's son. This is the smuggling, she asks to be unzipped as in computer files, getting them away from storage. The Bandit assumes she is a prostitute, but as we later learn she's a failed Broadway star. It fits with symbolism of the surveillance of MK Ops. People who are stars. The mistake on being a prostitute is perhaps to connect it with the other type of material that's connected at the hip with MK Ops. Pluto plus Uranus. Blackmail/brainwash, both involve monitoring, and this is why one of the most famous stories of the production of Star Wars involves her not wearing underwear. This is why Carrie in this film strips and gets mistaken for a whore. They have tons of comms like that tied together, the important thing was sending the messages. Each one had the same messages to send, but they sent them in different ways to better facilitate the quality of the movies. We meet the villain for the first time, Jackie Gleason from the Honeymooners as Sheriff Justice, as he arranged the wedding. He tells the boys to not wash the car just yet, as he will get her back. He specifically instructs them not to play with themselves. Note the shirt worn by one of them Coors, the same alcohol stolen by in the scene just before by Bandit. The alcohol equals Carrie are the same symbol. Carrie remains in disguise for quite a long time between being moved. Her entire reason for jumping into Bandit's car to escape the sheriff's wedding to his son is because the mother had no teeth. Teeth symbolism is what? Since we connected the sheriff to Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, let's return to that. The famous dentist elf that co-starred with him. That the abominable snowman was nothing without his teeth. In context it means an ability to murder. So Bandit and the snowman are now in charge of ferrying Carrie. The first of many high-speed escapes leading to the crashing of cop cars. Bandit tells Snowman he is on Highway 71. That's a mirrored 17 quetzales. Mirror comms are used to symbolize surveillance, and 17 is used to denote highest secrecy. Combining them in this context implies subject matter of secrecy. Smokey Bear begins pursuit. Note his actual name is Justice, and he has speeches on why his mission is just throughout. Carrie gets a code name of Frog for coded communication. Frog is a symbol for transformation, which fits the change ongoing. The first of many scenes where each side cooperates with one another to different effects. The sheriff from Texas butts heads with other state sheriffs and leads to car crashes as they sabotage each other. Meanwhile, Bandit and the snowman have a massive ring of truckers that cooperate and always perfectly give the bandit exactly what he needs. We see both in this scene. A trucker gives Bandit intel on police movements to let him escape by jumping a bridge, while Sheriff Justice and Arkansas scream at each other, leading to a crash. The bridge symbolism is a big one as it implies a transition symbol. Often tied to distances, and so this is represented in the film by moving Carrie across various state lines as well as literally jumping bridges in each state. You may wonder just how many of these comms are in Star Wars. The answer: just about all of them. You surely remember the famous scene in Star Wars where Luke is chased by the Empire and has to grapple hook Carrie Fisher across a broken bridge. If not, we will get to it. You may also remember how Star Wars begins with Darth Vader choking someone for information, first with his fits and then later with the Force. Note above the first of many discussions about a choke and puke. A name to give various restaurants with bad food they go to. Sheriff Justice orders a Diablo sandwich. A restaurant where the Bandit BO meets Sheriff Justice eating a devil sandwich. This is symbolic of the kinds of places information is forcefully obtained. Hence choke plus puke. Note their interaction. The Bandit cleans off Sheriff Justice. Symbolic of removing his mess. As the data tapes would be that. To which he talks about all the evils of the Bandit, almost killing 20, kidnapping, knocking down mailboxes, driving through backyards, symbol of going to place with files and picking them up. Remember, the CIA is cell-based. Info would be scattered all across the country. This leads to Carrie driving. Remember what Carrie symbolizes. What do you think it means for her to take control? The very next scene, the top came off of the sheriff's car, and then the next, trucker, to help the bandit, is the grave robber. Symbol of Carrie killing people, replacing the heads. Which leads to what? As she is talking about modeling for young boys, she drives into a children's football game and nearly runs over a bunch of kids. This causes the police to pause their pursuit. Just like the grave robber symbol cutting off the top of his car, this is the threat of Carrie. The very origin of Carrie involves brainwashing a child by driving them to make them decide it's a good idea to murder a bunch of kids. This leads to changing comm channels and Fred the dog taking a bath to clean off. Right after this, Carrie talks about how she was a failed Broadway actress. As I said before, it symbolizes being under surveillance. A star being someone seen by many. A show. These antics upset Sheriff Justice, who calls him a tick turd, that is a blood-sucking plus excrement. He asserts he will hang him. This is the first and only time he makes a threat on Bandit's life, which is an important distinction because we see the calm reaction to, what if this happens? And what happens is the Bandit pays a man at a gas station and then tells Carrie to do a little pond hopping. What does that mean? The very next scene we get a unique action by the Trucker Alliance. They help the Bandit in all sorts of ways, but this is the only one that intentionally carries out an attack. A Japanese trucker screams "Banzai" as he rips off his car door. Note the Bandit's discussion just before it, mental case. This is hiring a Carrie. Pond hopping equals across country getting from foreign associates like Japan. This is the answer to, if you threaten us, there are cells that can be paid to do this. They take the mutilated car parts as evidence and we never see the Japanese man again. Then we get more trucker friends of Bandit, an old woman as a self-described witch who intentionally wrecks her car so as to block off a street for Bandit. An absurd choice, but it ties into what is being purchased before. Having people wreck what they drive so as to take a payment. That's the whole point of MK Ops, is preparing a brainwashed person in case someone needs something precisely like this. Note the next theme song for the Bandit. Shackled by freedom, lyrics of people hate him but they wish they were him. The disagreement in the comms community that led to this change seems to be in how these kinds of ops should work. Whether they have autonomy or are controlled by a government. It's a complicated thing to unpack, but the act of removing evidence gives MK Ops freedom to act immorally. Rather than be tied to the discretion of a JFK or Nixon. You're the Joker, the theme song goes. The clown, and the way the world is set up, people with that position are controlled. The concept of fighting for their freedom is one I understand, but it's hard to accept when it's tied to a promotion of MK Ops. Anyway, next up the snowman gets into an argument about his dog Freddy biting someone. This leads to a fight, for which Snowman runs over the bikes of those that hit him. This is perhaps once again a, what if you attack our guy, we end you. They then have a girl code named Foxy Lady seducing and running distractions on the police. And while that is going on, another group of truckers help hide the Bandit in plain sight. They slip into a convoy which he calls Heaven. Which is an important word to distinguish it given what we see next. A talk about spotting beavers. A girl code named Little Beaver protects their back door. This is juxtaposed with the police raiding a prostitute trailer which intentionally lured in the police captain. Blackmail ops control police in many areas. There is no way for anyone involved in these trafficking operations to get in trouble because they have the local law already under their thumb. The problem is rogue agents, which we see next. A random officer who they call a daredevil rushing in to make an arrest in such a way that even police control couldn't get in time. They have Carrie flip him off, luring him into yet another police crash, and another one, and another one. Symbol of activating a Carrie for a distraction. All while the local populace cheers for Bandit with signs to keep ferrying illegal booze. Think about what it means for Star Wars and this film to be as successful as they were. The populace cheering for these ops. In this they literally, above, pledge their body and soul to the Bandit. To which the Bandit tells them to block off more cops, and they do. This leads to the climax as they get police helicopters, which is the only thing that worries Bandit, and so the snowman comes out from hiding and rams into more cop cars blocking to get to the finish line. They get their rich backer to give them one of dozens of Cadillac so they can escape the law and then take a double or nothing bet to get Boston clam chowder across the country. I'm not sure what Boston clam chowder symbolizes, but I did a quick look into media comms regarding the phrase. The first of which involved a famous joke from The Simpsons in the episode, "The Boy Who Knew Too Much." A parody of the Kennedys gets into a major scandal due to an accusation he had beaten up a waiter over saying chowder wrong. Part of the comm is pretty clear in this one as it is focused on rat traps, symbolizing his testimony as a rat dooming him. The fact that the accident was caused by slipping on what Bart ate is further reinforcing this. The fact that neither of these comms implies what actually happened is likely because whatever the actual symbol for chowder is, it's probably sexual. Given it looks like this. Plus, clams have a connotation in the birth of Venus. A way in pop culture to represent falling in love. The bet made to do the run again for Bandit with clam chowder fits what would be desired to move since the prior task was Carrie. Moving illegal brainwashing footage and then the sex tapes makes sense as a next stage of it. Smokey and the Bandit have one final talk and crucially they are on friendly terms. Smokey vows to keep chasing it for the first time, leaves his son stranded. This is perhaps suggesting they take mercy. If they keep pursuing they will keep getting hammered, but if they stop that'll be the end of it. They won't be targeted and will even be on friendly terms with those involved in these ops. Also, moving into the future, do you know when the villain of this film The Moon died? June 24, 1987, Jackie Gleason Honeymooner star death. June 24, 1987, Spaceballs, famous parody of Star Wars. Likely another fake death, and this further reinforces the connection between the two. I'm not sure what Spaceballs symbolized in terms of ops, but the end of the moon seems to have been a calm tide to that day. Note he had colon cancer, reconcile the symbol of mooning. A death of the moon. This also ties into feces as an evidence calm, which is a common symbol. I may decode Spaceballs in the future, but Star Wars is next. Star Wars, A New Hope. Film begins with Darth Vader trying to retrieve stolen plans to the Death Star. Vader asserts he will use Carrie Fisher to find the secret rebel base. C-3PO talks about getting sent to the Kessel spice mines as punishment. Afterwards the location R2-D2 is programmed to deliver the secret old data is beyond the Dune SEA to Uncle Ben. These are Dune references. The threat of being sent to Dune. Dune is synonymous with spice mining, and sandworms. A key influence on Star Wars was the failed adaptation of Dune. A famously failed production which I go over in this post as I believe it existed alongside the efforts to Decla's MKUltra. The very same thing Star Wars is sending comms about but in the other direction. It symbolized the efforts to Decla's. This is why talk about it is akin to humanity becoming enlightened. Which is why it was killed off. John Lennon funded his prior film, Holy Mountain, and got him noticed by Hollywood just before being murdered. So there was an attempt for Decla's and once again murder/threats put an end to it. These kinds of stories will be wonderful to hear post-Decla's as the efforts represented true heroism in the face of Carrie threats. C-3PO asserts getting caught equals Dune plus getting smashed. As perhaps to say that involvement in those MK ops when exposed would lead to a public outcry. This is one of several reasons for the necessity of moving all that data away from government hands. Though that's all speculating on my part and I doubt they would be that open about exposure fears. The secret data ends up being owned by the adoptive father of Luke Skywalker, who talks down the idea of going to Old Ben with the recorded material and instead wants to not get involved. The fact that he is called Ben is likely a reference to the comms around that time with Ben symbolizing the Watergate tapes. I go into it in my Willard post. Keep in mind this was 1977, and Nixon had been removed 1974. So, Ben, as a major symbol for power removal of the empire, would be a big thing. This also aligns with other comms we will see later of him. Therefore, Ben symbolizes someone involved in surveillance. The psychic and other powers of the Jedi representing the various things that come from that profession. The talk about the past, before the Empire, is an important context as these kinds of brainwashing ops go back much farther. The whole MK op was at the very outset intended to mimic foreign techniques. Before the Empire, the connection of these ops being old and I've traced it back a long way. For example, Ripley's Believe It or Not debut in 1918, and I believe its stories of extraordinary oddities were examples of the early psychological experiments going on. MK ops being encouraged to raise people in strange ways. This is why Ripley's death coincided with CIA funding and a famous beginning of public surveillance as a show. May 27, 1949. Ripley from Ripley Believe It or Not Death. May 27, 1949, CIA Agency Act funding passed. May 29, 1949, Candid Camera begins. June 19, 1952, I've Got a Secret premieres top ratings hit of its time. June 19, 1952, Special Forces created, the Psychological Warfare Center. A transition in ops from a more controlled to more open into various cells. Coinciding with the more widespread use of cameras as it was no longer so hamstrung by the richest in the world. Note also above Ripley-inspired Snoopy from Peanuts, which confirms my Snoopy theory, that it ties into snooping and the MK watching. When you look into the stories of Charlie Brown, original story below, you realize that comedy is a set of lessons on how to MK a kid. It also explains Ripley as a symbol in Aliens, another post. MK ops are a thing for many reasons, but I believe the primary is to control membership numbers and avoid growing too fast with untrustworthy people. This is why membership for outsiders is limited and they must perform a ritual sacrifice, MK, as an entrance fee, giving something of value. This has the added benefit of expanding a surveillance network to another house while keeping a level of seriousness and fear throughout. They don't need to be told to fear the cult, they are the fear, and any divergence from that path would destroy them. Anyway, Ben then talks of Jedis being hunted to extinction as well as the nature of the Force. The concept of being hunted to extinction is the end of the official government MK ops which had happened during JFK's time over a decade prior. The Force being the symbolism of the people all around the world in cells scattered everywhere cooperating as one entity to achieve a goal. They work as one force to push desired narratives like say Star Wars itself. It is in those scattered cells' best interest to not have the government with their hands on blackmail they themselves are using. This is a search for freedom, an irony given it is tied to controlling others. Note the location they are going to: Mossad Isley. Going to Mossad, which fits given it's a desert. Power shifts from the Senate to regional control, which allows the Empire to control everything because they have the fear of the Death Star. The symbol of which I'll get into a bit later, but note how Darth Vader doesn't think much of the Death Star in comparison to the Force. He demonstrates by choking a heckler from a distance. This is a variant of direct choking, but at a distance it is symbolic of controlling someone to do the same thing. His power is that of controlling other people. This is the Force, as it symbolizes what a ring of cultists can do. This is why the parody Spaceballs use literal rings to control the powers of the Schwartz. There are different sides of the Force because the ideals of the bulk of CIA cells behind Star Wars / Smokey and the Bandit were different than the cells supporting the government at the time. Anyone who disagrees with the ones in control of the narrative is dark side, it's all perspective. So they get to Mossad and then use mind control on weak minds to give them passage. This seems like a good time to decode Gunnius as his real name. Remember the smuggling of beer in the other film? In this film he pays for himself to be smuggled by a bandit archetype. So it fit perfectly with the symbol of Smokey and the Bandit, but moreover this concept of a power to control the weak-minded carries over to the effect of alcohol. Or if you recall from Smokey and the Bandit, the prostitute section, a symbol of controlling local law enforcement by blackmail to ensure delivery of the data tapes. Recall the Schwartz ring again as it symbolized not just the Force, but also connotations of control by sex as it was used consistently as a penis metaphor. Anyway, it all comes down to the ability to control the non-aware using power / influence. Many ways to control, and all of them are available and flexed by certain parties. They go into the bar, note the aliens plays sax and a red devil horned man. This is symbolic of a criminal underworld run by the comms aware. No bots allowed equals NO recording software. Then we have threats on Luke Skywalker by a pig-nosed, ham radio, man from a criminal which lead to his arm getting cut off. Arm equals reach, this being like the Smokey and the Bandit comms of, what happens if you threaten us? Chewbacca representing a Bigfoot, a symbolic murderer. He explicitly is stated to rip people's arms off later. The fare for smuggling Ben Guinness? Beer. 17/Q. The number used to denote highest secrecy, the same number in 1977. At the time of release when Q clearance began officially moving all the nuclear, Carrie, material. The comms suggest that this moving was actually overseas despite it asserting to be to Denver. This is likely why Denver International Airport is famous for a secret underground bunker and iconography of the apocalypse. There is a talk about fear of being hunted if they don't deliver the goods. Not one talk but twice. Once with the famous Han shot first, Greedo, and a second time with Jabba. The Jabba repeated talk wasn't in the original release. Representing the severity of not getting caught as the smuggling ops were to begin then to any takers. The planet-destroying Death Star, the only planet it ever destroys, is Carrie's planet. The MK planet, which as described before the government MK ops, Carrie, were ended before. What remains of the domestic ops was moved offshore in 1977, as I keep going into. This doesn't mean there was a lapse in ops, just that there was a vast array of affiliates in the 50s through the government, and the remnants of those operations still existed as incriminating evidence on the still running brainwashing going on. This is why it had to be moved. So what then is the Death Star itself? Note the shape. A reader pointed this one out to me. The Death Star eyeball. Symbolic of looking at the data, which is precisely why finding the old data is so essential to keep it working. The MK data was used as leverage for control, and in this film they specifically assert it was being used to control the government itself with fear. So this need to remove it from government hands was romanticized as freedom in the other film. The concept of the Force is explicitly asserted to control actions of any that uses it, but that it also obey commands. This is symbolic of aligning yourself to the will of the majority to act as one with the narrative. It obeying your will is the reward for helping this along, as people gain various rewards of making an ally out of a big cult ring. The way this control is represented is by closing his eyes and acting on instinct to not trust what he sees. Think about this in terms of Luke Skywalker's original name. Starkiller. The idea of not thinking but doing whatever you feel controlled to do. I'll return to this point later, and I believe Starkiller symbolism is something similar to Carrie. The famous scene "That's not a moon," as a moon is symbolically a keeper of secrets, but the Death Star symbolism is about exposing those secrets to control. So it's not a moon and it destroys Carrie's planet, which turns into asteroids. They get picked up by the Death Star and move to rescue Carrie Fisher. Specifically for big money, the same as Bandit was motivated to smuggle beer. In this case we have two different paydays, one for smuggling Guinness/Starkiller/old data and a second payday for taking Carrie. Remember how Carrie in the other film, as soon as he met the sheriff with the moon as a symbol, Carrie took over driving and drove right into a child's football game. In this film, as they get to Carrie, she takes control and drives them into a garbage chute with an periscope eyeball monster. Symbolic of forced removal of these files, trash. Then we have the famous bridge crossing scene, which once again the other film was full of carrying Carrie across broken bridges. This has the same connotation as Smokey in the Bandit, as the files are to move offshore. Far away from the government's grasp. Note the other famous line. If you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. What does that mean? Note Guinness waits until Luke Starkiller can see and then lets Darth Vader cut him in half, fully traumatizing him, and at which point Guinness becomes a voice in Luke's head telling him to destroy the space station and murder the Empire. Symbolic of controlling a Starkiller. Note how confused Vader is with the way Ben disappeared. They don't confiscate the data tapes/beer. This has an additional meaning as Guinness becomes a spook and guides things as a ghost. A standard practice with MK operatives is post-activation to have key operatives involved use fake deaths to avoid repercussions. Obviously MK ops, when they result in the death of say JFK, the powerful people this upset would look for the cells responsible. The only way to protect them is to have them go in hiding, to become a spook. Check my Godzilla post for more on that. It is standard practice as I go through in other posts that once activation of brainwashing the ones behind it disappear to avoid not people taking revenge that know the game. It also protects against criminal liability if their role were to ever be uncovered. Anyway, it can't be argued that Guinness becomes a voice in Mark Hamill's head from this point on, guiding him to mass murder the Empire. Now that they have retrieved the data tapes, they can use Starkiller and others as one-man fighters to take a single shot that will create a chain reaction to kill everyone. I believe this is a symbol of killing a powerful figure and a chain reaction with fear taking down everyone else. So the countdown symbolizing exposure by I versus guerrilla attacks to remove the head to kill the eye. Led by rebel forces like Porkins equals ham radio cooperation plus symbol of MK as it's a pejorative towards him. A guerrilla fighter MK'd into attacking. This concept of Darth Vader invading is likely why the following year the video game phenomenon hit a new fever pitch with Space Invaders, a symbol of killing invading military forces. Note it was within a day, or less with time zones. Of Dallas premiere. A show I've already decoded as a threat against a certain faction. Dallas equals place JFK was shot. April 1, 1978. Space Invaders original release date, most famous game to this point, April 2, 1978. Dallas premiere, famous for creating a murder mystery. As I said, Guinness is a voice in Starkiller's head telling him to fire his gun and kill the government officials. Some would call that schizophrenia induced by the trauma of watching his uncle die. To turn off directions and act on instinct. Symbolic for driving himself as programmed. Though much like how Carrie doesn't specifically symbolize the victim but instead the op, which is why she acts as a bully, Skywalker is after all the best driver. Now that we've talked extensively about the Death Star, let's talk the scientific death of stars. I'm talking about a supernova. You may think because comms are sent via Hollywood they are not sent in places like science, but no. Supernova. Almost every subject has comms, and that includes sports and every major branch of science. All major subjects have comms lingering at the top, but not all subjects are equal. For example, compare Hollywood and astronomy, define star in both contexts. Hollywood is more prevalent in our lives than astronomy. Our lives are eternally bombarded with celebrity news. Go to any website, turn on any radio station, look 2 feet outside your place of work and you may see a billboard with a star on it. Why does this matter? Comms are symbolic and a symbol like star is transparent. This is to say that highly publicized star news in astronomy is sometimes about Hollywood. Take for example a supernova. There aren't that many of these recorded online, but of the few I can find it's clear the meaning as a symbol. Literally a supernova is the destruction of a star. So, they detected the destruction of a star on March 16, 2012. Was there any famous stars that were destroyed that day? Why yes, in fact it's one of the most infamous examples. Ever heard of the Coney guy? Famously bringing attention to the sexual slavery and child abuse of Ugandan warlord Joseph Kony. Sudden star of the biggest viral video to ever exist to that point. Record breaking with the biggest audiences. Know what happened to him the same day of the supernova? A day he just decided to blow himself up by pleasuring himself publicly. How many years of his work went up in smoke with that one fateful decision? March 16, 2012, supernova detected type 2. Quite possibly the most clear destruction a star could bring onto themselves. Especially given his cause of protecting kids. The article talking about the culprit comes into focus. As these kinds of articles can give comms-aware people more details on why in the heck this unexpected event happened. They exist to give a way to describe the destruction of a star in scientific terms. To give people who wonder why on earth is he doing this context, likely in this case his cause of demonizing a child sex operation by a foreign warlord did not sit kindly with the strings above that warlord. Strings were pulled and the smaller strings above the Coney guy were forced into action of self-destruction lest they become the targets of the biggest fish. There are quite a few stars that have destroyed themselves, but that's not the only way for this kind of calm to apply. For example, a surprise retirement. May 31, 2010. Ken Griffey Jr. final game before surprise retirement. May 31, 2010. Japan detects Supernova 17. Note how his contract was written, which assumed he would have a much longer career. He is still being paid as if he were a player over 10 years after retirement. This guy is an important comms deal, as I go over in other posts. His distinction is being the symbol for the KGB transition post-USSR collapse into temporary Japanese affiliate. Check the post if you are curious. Yet another type of star destruction. Note the Prime Minister in particular was surprised. September 19, 2006. Surprise Thailand coup while PM is at the United Nations. September 18, 2006. Supernova detected. Keep in mind Thailand is over 13 hours ahead of the US, so 18th equals 19th. Another one. A name everyone knows. August 24, 2011. Steve Jobs quit surprising many. August 24, 2011. Supernova discovered. For the next one I remember Hulk Hogan's breakdown. Not the same date, but just before it, and reported all through the event. As likely this was understood to happen ahead of time. I decoded the same thing with Bill Cosby, so I doubt he had a supernova at the date of destruction, but instead it was talked about ahead of it happening. These things become news as they are made aware. After all, the earlier the better. This means not every celebrity destruction will likely have the supernova matching precisely, but many will. Let's move on. Before, when I talked about Carrie extensively, it was Stephen King's first book, and among the many other books he made that inspired fiction there was one called Myst. Two of the most famous horror game series. Half-Life and Silent Hill were inspired by Myst, so let's talk about that one, as Half-Life in particular is famously tied to science and physics. Half-Life and gravity gun. In my last post I mentioned this bit. November 16, 2004. Godfather Returns, Book 3. November 16, 2004. Valve, Half-Life. Given Godfather symbolism was tied to many major shifts, this seemed meaningful to me. The most famous thing about the Valve developer isn't Half-Life, it's their platform of Steam. Note it has over 132 million active users and represents 18% of all global PC game sales. That is a huge chunk of the pie. And I do believe that's why Godfather Strings is tied to Valve as a symbol. As it was being noted as a major player going forward. We can use this connection to string pulling as a big hint, as whatever Steam would be symbolized by is likely going to be tied into the most famous title around the time for Valve. Which of course is Half-Life 2. What was most famous about Half-Life 2? What did it introduce? The answer is the famous gravity gun. The gravity gun specifically pulled things towards the user and shot them out at other people. Symbolism of Steam. Pulling boxes, primarily, games boxes, into Steam and sending it, game sales, to other people. Bringing all the things to Steam. Note City 17, as that's a number that is so frequently tied into secrets, and Mossman being someone she has a rivalry with, just like CIA/Mossad. Another major title from Valve tied to this Steam symbol is Portal. The concept of sending material into one place and it appearing another. Symbol of the Steam platform in a different way. Note momentum is retained through portals, as this implies they aren't blacklisting any to get low downloads like other services. Google waiting, for example. The enemy being GLaDOS, symbol of Microsoft as someone they exist as an alternative with their Steam platform. Myst was the inspiration. What is Myst about? A story about government experiments and human sacrifice as a form of protection in part. Half-Life is so tied to this book. The original name of the game's location was going to be the same name as the military base from Myst. In both cases the base was involved in experiments leading to the monster, Myst. In both cases it's representing the military origin of MK, and this is why Myst has a focus on human sacrifice. The other major inspiration for Half-Life was Doom. A game I've specifically tied to the threat of death to others. The team was said to want to have Half-Life to scare you like Doom did. Above. How does Half-Life represent this? Well, in the game you play Gordon Freeman, who is tasked with pushing a mysterious substance into a beam that leads to a disaster which the G-Man uses to take over the territory of an alien. Note the iconic weapon of Half-Life, crowbar. If you remember my 90s decode of crow symbols, it was used in the 90s as a threat tied to the Doom comms. All intended to assert that any that didn't comply with the Clinton transition would become the next Bruce and Brandon Lee. So overall Steam/Valve is an extension of many other comms I've gone through. Another cell cooperating or controlled by the same entities sending threats to anyone trying to expose things. At least this seemed to be true in the 90s. These kinds of affiliations do change. The crowbar symbol, however, denotes that at least at the time of launch it was affiliated with those creating fear. This is perhaps why the first game involves Freeman following orders and creating a disaster. One last bit of Half-Life iconography. The G-Man who throughout Half-Life 1 uses the player and their disaster to take over the land of an alien. Likely G-Zero Man is symbolic of government, non-specific, as he is portrayed as potentially an ally or enemy. The goal of not being controlled by him as paramount. I think he represents any foreign government trying to control a Freeman. As in the cult in general at large. The various cells at large making up the body of the comms community. I often oversimplify and call these cells CIA, despite most in that camp not having a direct tie to the US government. They are perhaps better defined as miscellaneous, as the variety defies any other word. Anyway, since we talked about gravity as a comm for bringing things to people, let's take a step further with gravity as a symbol. Black hole. I'm not going to go too in depth on this one, mainly because there are very few dates to be found, so I just can't dig that deeply. Even so, I'm pretty sure I know the symbol. The specific attribute of a black hole is not letting light escape from it. Sucking in all visibility. This is why it likely symbolizes the act of hiding something. Like, for example, declaring something state secrets so that it becomes literally illegal to divulge it. However, I think it applies to all sorts of things. They are what happens when a star dies. Collapses under its own gravity. Large Hadron Collider I fully decoded in this post represented Google. The symbolism of finding the God particle that assigns all other particles weight is the symbolism of Google giving selective traffic to friendly sources and slowing down others. It became the top the same time frame they found the God particle. With that in mind, the ability of it to create micro black holes fit the basic functionality it advertises for itself in comms. However, let's consider some examples of black holes that are official. The first one ever photographed. April 10, 2019, M87 first black hole pictured ever. April 11, 2019, Assange arrested. There's more to this comm in this post, but for the sake of trying to get a basic concept of black hole, the concept of Assange himself and any case around him is a perfect example. He embodies more than any other human being on Earth the retention of secret classified files. Second place being Snowden. Announcing they took a picture of a black hole at 87, 87 typically shorthand for 187, which is a symbol for murder, makes me think they are discussing highly explosive material that has been asserted ahead of time for watchers to not worry. If they had arrested him before the black hole, there may have been panic, as it may have implied it would be in the open. Instead, just before the arrest we get an announcement of nothing TOC. Well, ironically it's the first picture of one, but you know what I mean. This doesn't mean it won't be appearing, only that they don't intend on releasing it too soon. Likely it's all going on with court behind closed doors. Another example that's more clear with symbolism. So I've gone over Monty Python comms before, and one in particular famous sketch involving cheese provided the symbolism that was literally launched into space. This suggests there may have been an important comm sent that day with that sketch, but what kind of comm could be sent using cheese? January 7, 1972. First black hole Cygnus. January 7, 1972, Monty Python, Cheese Shop Sketch. The very first black hole that day. Now why does this matter in relation to cheese? Well, remember all our talk about moons before in relation to holding of classified information? What is the moon made of? Note a child making that connection between mice and moon cheese. That's because this symbol of the moon as cheese is incredibly prominent to the extent that it's one of the first thing children are told, as a joke. But joke as it is, this rat's eating the moon's cheese has a calm to it. What was the calm of that sketch the day of the first black hole? They were all out of cheese. The comedy coming from just how many different kinds of cheese he asks for. Including beaver cheese, beaver being a prominent symbol in that era of what? It seems to me that day there was some kind of agreement to create a black hole, and this is why they made a sketch asserting all the cheese was gone. Literally all of it. The repetition each time just making it stronger as a message. Furthermore, in the sketch they make a point of how clean it is. So this implies the removal could have been for protection. So let's do another example. When I was looking into sequences, I noticed one major one with black holes began the same day Jeb Bush announced. This could imply, just like with Google mini black holes killing traffic to small ones, that Jeb Bush was to have light sucked away from him. I've gone over that in many posts, as this is what made Trump as we know him. It's a long story, but he appears to have been the black hole in this situation. June 15, 2015. Jeb Bush announces June 15, 2015, NASA Swift detects first signs renewed activity black hole June 16, 2015, Trump escalator falling sign June 17, 2015, worldwide observing campaign was commenced for black hole. The concept of him sucking away attention was why the MSM got behind him, until of course fully turning on him. But this op, which I've decoded extensively in this post, was promoted specifically to bury Bush. They didn't realize this was all part of a larger plan that would use that media power to win rather than just prop up HRC. These black hole comms are all in context of their local galaxy, so let's define that. Galaxy. The galaxy is a collection of stars, and so it implies a galaxy, as would be suggested, is itself a symbol of a ring of people. Know what the 7th most popular site in the world last year was? 10th this year. March 1, 2007, 0301x videos. Paris 8th most popular site in world. March 2, 2007, discovery of galaxy, banana-shaped arc. Read that description carefully of the banana galaxy, it's practically a joke. Detected ripped into pieces, stripped away stars fling out homeless stars into intergalactic space. During the RAM pressure stripping process, scientists have nicknamed the stretched spiral the comet galaxy. This seems to be a calm of finding a unique group of stars that are going to have enough impact to do something like give Google a run for its money in popularity. This is why it's announced, so that people know that all these pornography sites everywhere are irrelevant, but when this one hits, new galaxy. And they pepper in little clues so they know the context. And since we understand galaxy and black hole, let's combine the two. But before I do that, you need a tiny bit of context. Perhaps the most famous example of political corruption, Boss Tweed. Note the date he escaped from prison after stealing millions is the same day a new galaxy was discovered. December 4, 1875. Notorious NYC politician Boss Tweed escapes from prison and flees to Spain. December 4, 1875. NGC 1277. Galaxy discovered. The point being, the day he escaped, the discovery was announced of some new group of players powerful enough to pull that off. He was already a massive star, as you can see from those political cartoons, and countless more you can find online. So him escaping and then being found is representative of them knowing who was involved, as they picked him up not long after. Talking in code so as to not alert that they knew these things. Now what makes this particularly worth discussing here is because we know that NGC 1277, galaxy, symbolizes political corruption in regards to powerful USA politics. The guy who was said to have literally rigged the elections and stole the money. Fast forward to 2012. In that galaxy. December 4, 1875. Notorious NYC politician Boss Tweed escapes from prison and flees to Spain. December 4, 1875. NGC 1277. Galaxy discovered. November 27, 2012. Whistleblower Protection Act enhancement. November 28, 2012. Black hole discovered in NGC 1277. Same time of new whistleblower protections, we get an announcement of a huge black hole from the political corruption galaxy. So while I need to do more digging on these, it feels like it's all fairly clear what things represent. Concluding thoughts. As is evident by this post, stars are a big deal, but you may still not fully appreciate what they are. So let's go into that for a moment. A local celebrity in relation to a national celebrity in relation to a worldwide celebrity, all in relation to a single human being with no media power. The ability to speak and have words carry out over great distances with great impact. It's hard to convey the power of it as it's mostly invisible power. A star commands headlines in all sorts of ways, and they can amplify or diminish any desired message. I've known many people who idolize celebrities. I can't think of anyone that doesn't IRL. If they suggest a course of action, it's something they take as seriously as if a close friend suggested it. The power of celebrity plays on the point of friends, as celebrities make them laugh and cry and hate, and through the media we are constantly surrounded with people see them more than they do an actual friend, so of course the relationship is there. This is why people trust them, and it allows their face to be used to push society in directions. Even people who don't like celebrities as a rule still have a few they consider exceptions. This extends to so many other parts of society. Especially racial/gender warfare, as people become indoctrinated into these paths due to seeing oppression they never see IRL. They see it all around them as if it were real because it is presented as true representations of the world. I'd love to work at diffusing that terrible connection. This power needs to be made more visual so that people can understand it in spatial and mathematical terms, and so I've been working with someone who may be able to present these ideas in graphical form. Look forward to that. Extra Decode, Game of Life. Did you know the Game of Life was originally created in 1860, discontinued after a few years and revived in 1960? Do you know what 1861 and 1961 have in common? Yes. 2 presidents were inaugurated and then would get assassinated soon after. Note how the original version began due to him screwing up Lincoln's portrait. I believe these games were warnings from powerful figures to Lincoln on what to do to stay alive. The dark features of the original are less pronounced in the 1960 version, but because it invokes the original it sends the same message. A message which includes one of the options being literally suicide. This concept of trying to make it to the end of the game of life, to the day of reckoning, and either become enormously wealthy or just about everything pushed in pop culture is a calm of some kind, and this all fits with much of the rest of this post as I've discussed threats as a major avenue they follow for effective control. This particular one demonstrates how the CIA of the 1960s behind JFK's death is by lineage the same as those pro-slavery pushers in the 1860s. The lineage of power from then to now. All still run with hostages, so there is complexity to who is at fault, but the victims are real and we need to find truth for their sakes. The more educated people are the better for so many reasons. Of course we are lucky to live in this time as all of this is changing. I go over it frequently, and everybody's favorite section and most constant suggestion is more updates. I did find a few this week. Updates. The most important ongoing find I have over the past couple of years is probably the big Biden countdown. September 26, 2020. Biden, get to the Senate 180 years ago. Plus 180 days equals March 25, 2021. March 25, 2021. Biden, go back 120 years ago. Plus 120 days equals July 23, 2021. Torch passing event begins. July 23, 2021, Japan Olympics start. July 24, 2021. Torch passing event ends. August 8, 2021. Japan Olympics end. Plus 180 days equals February 4, 2022. February 4, 2022. China Olympics start. June 2, 2021. Biden loses it, says January was 15 months ago. Plus 15 months equals September 2, 2022. September 2, 2022. Biden countdown end. Last I left off I hadn't figured out what the heck happened at the long-awaited countdown. So. September 2, 2022. Big news that day. September 2, 2022. Biden countdown end. September 2, 2022. The Lord of the Rings _ the Rings of Power. September 2, 2022. Tiffany Haddish and Aries Spears accused of child abuse in a lawsuit. Spears equals tip of spear beginning of attack. Tiffany equals Tiffany Blue equals private info. Check comms list, the names of the accused. There are a few reasons I think this is the right answer. As I've gone over in past posts, the symbolism of control with a ring. Becoming invisible as you are acting through someone else. Looking at the video of the supposed abuse of child. Striped underwear boy in suggestive positions / bath as he spies on him. Likely it was a comm at the time of some kind of perversion, and the fact that it involved a comedian and then was dismissed less than a month later a point on it all being a show. People who are going to be utilized in court to accomplish specific necessary points. This is why the statute of limitations on crimes was recently removed. I suspect this may be a well thought out comm, so that means birthdates may be in play. Born the same day a famous US chess champion lost his crown without a fight. This could imply a changing of crown without a fight. Now when it comes to invoking a symbol like this, it's important to contextually understand the original in sequence. This was 1975. What king had just been replaced? The answer is Nixon in 1974. How was he removed? Deep throat. June 12, 1972. Deep throat film. June 13, 1972. Microsoft Trafo Data Original Traffic Tape Company. June 17, 1972. Watergate Arrest Complex DC. 1973-1974. Deep throat scandal. August 8, 1974. Nixon resigned. April 4, 1975. Fisher loses chess title. April 4, 1975. Microsoft founded. It's a complex operation that took Nixon down. Keep in mind Nixon won 49-50 states, so making him the most unpopular president within a year was a tremendous effort. Note tape processing relationship, deep throat, which ties into. Note deep throat the same timeframe as the. And we return to Ben, the rat. I go over Ben earlier in the post. I know some people read this section first. August 4, 1972. Ben, breakout hit for Michael Jackson solo. August 4, 1972. Bobby Fischer highest chess score of career. A film released on the exact same date as the smoking gun tape. The origin of which a film about rats same month as the Watergate system itself was installed. The fact that they timed the sequel, Ben, to the precise day is astounding, but I suspect Watergate itself was planned out in such a way that they knew the precise dates Nixon would be approached by people and be forced to make a decision on it. Coordinated comms sent in strange ways, I'm just following the patterns. This may not mean anything as it's easy to find one or two connections in the noise due to just how many there are, but when they build up they can give a trajectory towards the correct answers. Hopefully you can tell the difference when I switch to speculation. You need to learn how to critically think to understand comms without my help. Otherwise you'll just end up being driven by whoever you happen to be reading that given day. Other news. September 15, 2022. Harvey Weinstein begs judge to stop prison dentist from pulling rotten teeth. This situation is an emergency. Teeth symbolism is about people who are well embedded and hard to remove. Note the location: Twin Towers Correctional. 9/11 symbolism. Rotten teeth likely denoting criminal, and the intent to rip them out soon is a good thing. Weinstein acting as a comms vehicle for criminals' proceedings. Those that represent sex crimes like himself. So great news, and it fits with the other comms for accusations incoming. September 20, 2022. Mike Lindell says vendors are bailing on his MyStore platform because they don't want to be associated with an FBI investigation. FBI took his data was taken and his store hurt by the scandal. This is a message he is cooperating to send to suggest people stop trying to wait things out, as they will get sucked into the investigation and it'll hurt their business. Remember the cell-based structure of the comms world, many are cooperating but some aren't. These holdouts are key to flip, and there are many that still remain this way. One last one. King Charles loses his temper at leaking pen, every stinking time. Actually, I need to dig deeper, as I've barely looked at anything going on with the royals this week, and so much has happened with them. What I can say is the Queen, prior to another fake death, was helping with her pen. The symbolism in that case was of using EO-like powers for cooperation, and this could signify what's going on with the new king. The ink, getting everywhere, could imply a sudden explosion of actions about to hit. I'm confident he is part of the show. I've been decoded, and I don't think he's going to be king for nearly as long as his mother was. However long he has the crown, I'm sure it'll all be for preparation for the next phase of things. It's been a very long transition, but that's just the way it has to be. It takes a lot of time to mitigate the strengths of the in-place system. COVID sucked up countless billions from the reserves of the elite, but that was just one of many phases. For the most part, I'm confident that right now examples are continually being made so that more and more switch to cooperating. It's a slow process, but the name of the game is long-term solutions. There are countless individual, free cells around the world that are controlled by fear, and most of the time cooperate with whoever has their throat in their hands. This is one of many reasons they choose not to get involved. While not the monster it was before, it has left deep scars over the course of centuries of domination. This is why the world has to be cleaned out one major time over, as it is being now. Then they can figure something out, a less monstrous than what you know of the world today. Maybe even something objectively good. We shall see. I intend to keep going until I've achieved fluency, and then make literature to guide others to the same end. Whether this is meaningful remains to be seen, but it's what I've chosen to do for now. I'm happy a few readers like you drop in from time to time to see where I'm at with that. Telegram chat. Join our Telegram group chat. Send leads, begin decoding. This has been Science of Stars, Stardom and Star Wars.